All right. I think what we're going to do is we're going to have the panelists introduce themselves and say a little bit about what they do and how it relates to distribution here, and then we'll start the questions from there. At the end, there'll be time for 1 or 2 questions from the audience, but let's start at the end with Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa Schwartz. I'm the Executive Vice President of Distribution for IFC Films and Sundance Selects.
I'm Kent Sanderson. I am Head of Acquisitions and Ancillary Distribution for Bleecker Street.
Daniela Elsner. I'm Head of Doc and Film International, a sales company for feature films and documentaries based in France and Paris.
Hello, I'm Vincent Maraval from Wild Bunch. I'm doing distribution in France, Italy, Spain, Germany, and international sales.
Okay, thanks. I wanted to just open it up with a general question as to what each of you, from each different perspective, what you see as the biggest challenge for the day-and-date distribution model.
Are you starting with me?
I'm looking at you.
Damn you. You know, I think the challenge is always making sure what you're looking at to acquire to put through the model has, you know, that delicate balance of good cast, good genre, and something that appeals to the audience, and it makes sense for that model. So that's always the balance there.
Yeah, there's only so many movies out there that I think are truly sort of home runs within this space. There's probably a better way to release any movie. When you have any movie, there's always sort of the ideal release plan. But only some movies are truly appropriate for day and date, and there's not really that many of them. And at the same time, there's not really even that many places you can play them within the United States if you're on VOD at the same time. There's not a tremendous amount of theatrical support.
One thing that we mentioned backstage I thought was interesting is my question was, generally speaking, besides good movies, what does best in that context? What kinds of movies, if you had to look at a general trend, do the best, especially in a day-and-date VOD context?
I mean, the movies that work best day and date, you know, have a lot of the same qualifiers and stuff that works best on VOD, even if it's traditionally released. The 2 biggest, of course, would be cast, having name brand A-list actors in the movie that are visible and on the box art, and you know, lend a certain air of familiarity. And then genre. I mean, people, frankly, are just more likely to rent comedies and thrillers on VOD than they are heavy dramas. And so, you know, a comedy or thriller with A-list cast is the perfect candidate for day and date, generally speaking.
And it's interesting because we have 3 labels: IFC Film, which is sort of straight ahead, larger cast-driven independence; IFC Midnight, which is genre, horror thriller; and then Sundance Selects, which is more documentaries and specialty art house release films. And it's been very interesting because I completely agree that comedies and thrillers with certain, you know, sort of attributes do well, but it's been amazing the kind of numbers that can also happen by putting a film out there. The artwork's done really well. We take great pride in that. But also the description of the film is compelling, and we also find, working with directors consistently over time, and we've done it for 7 years now, so we can see trends where people will go, you know, go to, and if you drive the social media aspects and you get them, the folks that, the filmmakers and cast involved, and they're tweeting and they're pushing it, that the numbers can be really surprising for something that didn't necessarily have great cast, but it had a great formula.
Are there specific keywords that tend to lure people?
I contend that the word haunt is a good one. Write that down, haunt. Haunter, haunting, any variation. But no, you know, really good, solid, supernatural, you know, genre films can do actually quite well.
I want to bring in the international perspective here. What do you see as being the biggest challenges to the VOD market overseas?
Well, I think in Europe you can imagine that we have all the territories with all the languages. And I think right now our biggest challenge is to try to bring not only day and date on a territory base, but to try to keep all the territories in a time slot that is quite close. Because nowadays everyone is aware of everything. Like you have the film premiering in Cannes, whole Europe knows about the films. And the challenge is that we go out with the films not on a 1 year or 1.5 year scale, but to try to get at the time slot that every public can get access to the film quickly, because if not, piracy takes over anyway. So I think for us, it's a big challenge. It's very complicated because we are not facing one language. We are facing like 20 languages, and we need to be quick in translating and things like that. And that's for me, it's one of the challenges. We try to figure out ways with the support of the European Union, etc., to get models rolling that could be help for that.
Yeah, for me, I will add the biggest challenge we have is that day-and-date release don't exist and are illegal in Europe. In France, you have a legislation that you cannot release a movie in the same time in cinema and in VOD. So the main challenge we have today is to change the habits, is to fight against the lobbying of the exhibitors, and especially the big group, to make it possible. Today, a day-and-date release in France and in Italy, I think Spain too, is illegal. So
do you think that's realistic? And what will be the facilitators if there is change?
It's there are two sides. There is a political issue. There is a fight to. I mean, it's a lobbying question. There are two strong lobbies, which are the pay TV, who have a special window, and the exhibitors who don't want the things to change, who don't want what we call in France the chronology of media to change. And you have the lobby of the distributors, or I would say more generally the right holders, who want more freedom to exploit their rights because they have to face today new model of financing, and they need flexibility in the way they use windows. So I think it will happen. I think it's just a question of time and a question of changing habits. If the way we try to change it, we did it last summer during Cannes when we released Welcome to New York straight to VOD, is to take some big films with a big potential theatrically in France and go straight to VOD just to lobby, just to say to the exhibitors, if you keep that position, you will lose some movies. We will go somewhere else.
That's interesting. You'd think, especially in territories like Spain that have been hit so hard by piracy, that might be a driving factor here. Do you think that's at work?
That's the only way to fight against piracy anyway. There is no political will to fight against piracy in Europe. I don't know in North America, but in Europe there is no political action against piracy. There is even a belief in France that we shouldn't punish people pirating, that somewhere culture should be free for some people. So it's a very difficult fight to do, but it's the only way today. Things have changed very quickly in the last 5 years in terms of the way we exploit films, the way people are watching films. And today all the legislation which has been done to protect local industries, that legislation is old-fashioned. That doesn't work anymore. So it's just you have to integrate piracy, but you also have to integrate the way the young generation is watching films.
Spain is actually a good example because Spain theaters are really going down. The number of theaters and screens are less and less, and the piracy is such a great issue. But they can do day and date, and it works. And it works strangely on all kinds of films. It works also on smaller art house films, especially because there are no venues for cinema anymore. And if they go out on small amounts of screens, the VOD does work. And they do quicker than the piracy. So it's a good example of a start, but it's very small figures still. So
in the US, I'm interested in your perspective on when, if ever, there will be a major studio that, there have been dabblings, but that has a specific day-and-date policy that they take to the theater owners and get sign-off.
I mean, a major studio has already done it, and that's Warner Brothers with Veronica Mars. They had flirted with going outside or hiring a third party to book theatrical, and they ended up doing it themselves. And they did so in close conjunction with a major exhibitor, specifically AMC. they did what's called four-walling, which is a term that means essentially renting out the theater. But they did so very aggressively, and they also played a couple, some traditional venues as well, traditional meaning a revenue-sharing model like any other movie playing in a movie theater. And they went pretty wide with it and grossed, what, like $4.5 million in theaters? Which is, you know, they used a pre-existing fan base and it really worked. I think for now it's probably a little bit of a one-off for them. It's a very unique case that, you know, the way the film was produced and kickstarted in conjunction with Warner Brothers digital distribution, I think sort of created an interesting scenario for them, but it did allow them to play much like some of the independents and major independents do, which is, you know, working closely with exhibitors that are willing to do this kind of release model and making it worth their while. You know, with this four-walling model, you know, Lionsgate and Roadside. Lionsgate sort of somewhere between an independent and a major. You know, definitely are in this space, but generally speaking, the theatrical bookers at Lionsgate aren't necessarily directly working with the exhibition community on day-and-date releases. I mean, Arbitrage and Margin Call, which remain the poster children for the aggressive theatrical day-and-date, were both booked by Roadside Attractions, and many of the day-and-date titles that Lionsgate is putting out right now, like the Prince with Jason Patric and Bruce Willis, are being booked by third parties. So I think there's some dabbling, but in terms of having a company that's releasing Star Wars and is also doing day-and-date, I think there's probably going to be some hesitation on the distributor front in protecting those relationships for quite some time.
Yeah, some have suggested that 50 Shades of Grey might be the perfect day-and-date title. What do you guys think about that?
I mean, here's the thing, is that on VOD, you can make real money. I mean, there are movies that make tens of millions of dollars on VOD. 50 Shades of Grey, is a movie that I think that Universal and Focus probably envision more than the ceiling that VOD could provide. I mean, if, you know, 50 Shades of Grey, I have no idea what it could make, but it could make 100, it could make $150 million. I have no idea. It's up to everyone who shows up on Valentine's Day next year. But I think that they probably realize that if you go and you make $150 million, those people, you're also going to have people that are going to rent on a VOD. There's no upside. You can have your cake and eat it too with a movie like that.
What about pricing on day and date? Where do you guys fall on that? And do you think that there will be a premium pricing model instituted, either by major studios or by companies like Lionsgate, where you pay $30 to watch it, you know, the first weekend it's in theaters, something like that?
I have no idea. But what I will say is I think that there's a balance, right? So there's the convenience to have it in your home, and then you'll hear the pitch about, you know, you can watch it with 4 people there, et cetera. But I do think that there'll be a price sensitivity at a certain point where it's not viable because people just won't want to pay up to that kind of level to watch something in their home. And I think the feedback I get from distributors is there's real sensitivity to it.
And you know, there was an experiment done with DirecTV about 2 years ago where you could rent a movie for $30 about 6 weeks after release. It was done very quietly with not a lot of fanfare, and I think there were very mixed results from that experiment. And then of course there's Prima Cinema, which you know, is day and date for millionaires. It's, you know, it's what, a $20,000 setup fee or something like that, and you can watch it day and date. You know, big theatrical movies. I think the trouble that everyone has is the same thing that is keeping major studios away from this model, is that whether you're charging $29.99 or Universal had a $59.99 idea in mind for Tower Heist that ended up getting backlash, I think it was from Cinemark specifically, is that there is a line in the sand being drawn by the exhibition community, which is not unfair at all. It is to say that whether you're charging $6.99 or $9.99 or $59.99, it's still, you know, they still view it as a threat to the theatrical experience.
I wanted to get into a little bit of the filmmaker side here, and your experience with what the filmmakers want out of these deals. The acceptance of VOD has come a long way in the past, I think, 5 years. But what are the top priorities for filmmakers when you start to say, okay, this is what our deal is going to look like? besides getting paid?
Yes, it's the first obstacle was, of course, that most of the filmmakers, they want to go theatrical, not for the financial reasons, but because it brings them more recognition. They think there is more press, more coverage. That has changed. For example, when we decided to go VOD with Welcome to New York, we never had any problem with Abel Ferrara. He was happy with it. He was happy to make a first experience. I even have a funny anecdote. That same festival, it was during Cannes Film Festival, we had the Jean-Luc Godard film, Farewell to Language, and Godard was jealous. He was telling us, but why I cannot go straight to VOD? I would like to do the same. And we explained that the 3D in VOD is not yet very performant. So it's something that has changed, really. I don't think that directors have any more issue on that side. Then on a financial point of view, Abel Ferrara film, the previous one, 444, did 20,000 admissions in France. That one, and the share you have on a cinema ticket is €2, so you can calculate, it's not much. With Welcome to New York, we did 200,000 sales, and the share we had was close to €4. So suddenly, the volume of activity for his film was multiplied by 20, 30 more. So it's something where he recognized that it's financially more interesting. Of course, it depends on the film. I agree that all films don't have a VOD career. It was a very special film for the French market, so it was probably the right strategy. But on the financial side, usually you have the same interest than the director. So it's a reflection, it's a thinking you do with him. So it's not, you don't have to convince him that you don't do it against him. On the financial side, you do it with him. On the will or the desire to go in theaters, it's something different, but once again, I think it has changed. I think they accept it more now.
Do others agree with that?
Yeah, I think the filmmakers, I mean, especially if you look at the very independent side of art house films, the problematic is direct VOD is not going to work or will be very difficult because we need the theatrical release for the press interest, to get the publicity, etc. And I think a lot of independent filmmakers still want to see their film on a big screen. I mean, this is especially Europeans are still, they make the films for the big screen. And we need it somehow. I mean, all business models we are trying out with the European Union, with media, are all focused on getting publicity upfront out of either festival screenings or European screenings the same day. We try something with Rotterdam, which will be a screening the same day in several European cities of the same film, and a Q&A, a European Q&A via SMS and whatever, and online. And hopefully this gives enough publicity to have, after that, a VOD interest on the title. But this is what is to be, we have to prove this. But I was very impressed because you had an example later on a film that did like 30,000 box office US dollar box office, and then was a huge splash on VOD. But this needs cast. I think it's interesting. I mean, this is a different way. This is the bigger films with the right cast, and that can work. But I think it's really a different challenge for the different films.
Yeah, no, I think when we talk about day-and-date release models, there's a huge sliding scale in what that is. Because there are movies that come out, and I'm speaking specifically about the U.S. right now, that have extremely small theatrical releases. You know, generally the number is 10 screens within certain markets to trigger day-and-date pricing and placement. But you know, you can do that with very little local support, and the box office will be literally negligible. You know, you look at something like Arbitrage, which is on the completely other end of the scale, where there's a ton of local support, real theatrical spending going on, a lot of four-walling, which is very expensive, and it grossed $7.8 million in theaters, and you know, a very large number on VOD as well. But there are many, many more films where you can go, and these movies can do 7 figures on VOD net. And you go to Box Office Mojo, and you will literally see a not applicable next to the box office, even though there's definitely empirical proof that it played in theaters. It's because the number is so small that the distributor doesn't even see the need to report it. But the job is done, in so much that even those 10 screens generate reviews, publicity, and legitimization to make the movie feel like a real film when it plays on VOD.
You mentioned arbitrage. That's often cited as one of the big successes, and that's because the numbers were put out there by the distributor. Where do you guys stand on this issue of whether VOD numbers get reported?
Well, I'm just going to make a quick comment to the last, because we're a company that does traditional and day and date, sort of all in. We're not dabblers in the space. It's been a core business. And I think you can't underestimate the point enough that it's important to put them in theaters. We just did Cold in July, for example. We were on 100 screens at one time on a day and date model. It's really important, you know, depending on the film and where you're going in, to make a real commitment to say, we're getting into this deep, we're going to do a theatrical run, get reviews, curate, press, and we regularly treat our films from a publicity standpoint like a major release in terms of getting cast on major talk shows, and it's, you know, Tonight with Jimmy Fallon, et cetera. But it's a really, to your point, concerted effort that you have to put into it to get people comfortable in saying, ultimately, I want the widest possible audience, but it's important to me to also be on screens and know I'll be handled like a real release.
Do you find that media outlets are much more receptive now to guests and such that are promoting VOD releases?
I think it's a huge shift, pardon, from when we started 7 years ago, and people understanding it's a viable distribution method for films with big cast. And big cast is bookable. So, you know, if it's an interesting story and they have a relationship with the shows, they're booked, which is great,
Yeah, no, I think people really get it. I mean, you know, we've had talent on the Tonight Show talking about iTunes, you know, weeks before it comes out in theaters, and that's considered a normal thing. And not only does the talent get it, the reps are starting to get it, the people that work on these shows get it, and even if the theatrical release is very small, and again, there's a huge swath. You know, there's so many different ways you can do this. And everyone, I think, and every distributor's tried different versions of how big the theatrical is going to be. But I think in all the cases, everyone gets that the publicity is so central to whatever you're doing, because that's what makes the movie feel real, and that's what can really drive awareness beyond just the marketing that comes with a wider theatrical presence.
All right, back to the VOD numbers question that everyone loves. Where do you stand on that, and do you think that there will be widespread acceptance of releasing numbers?
You or me? I'll take the popular question. You know, I think in terms of VOD numbers, it's a real, first of all, they do get reported. Let's start there. VOD numbers get reported to producers, they get reported to filmmakers. There's complete transparency in that relationship. When there's a lot of pressure to make them public, I think the complication is and I can speak to it over the last 7 years, it's a marketplace that's changing constantly, and it's competitive. And so naturally, if you're in a business that's evolving and you're taking big financial risks, you know, I'm not sure why there seems to be this movement of obligation for distributors to share what is competitive and also, not an insignificant point, often confidential between yourself and those distributors. So will it get to that at a certain point in time? It might, but for now, you know, we speak in general directional terms, like it did very well, or, you know, how it goes, but we don't get into specifics.
I agree, and I think that also that there's a lack of context that's out there. A box office gross. Anybody can go on and look at Variety on Sunday morning, or Box Office Mojo, or Rent Track, and say, oh, well, so and so. This is how many theaters it played in. This is, you know, how many people showed up. You know, assuming, you know, the average ticket price. And there's not a whole lot of context. We've been educated on what box office is since the early 20th century. On VOD, there are so many other factors in play. What platforms it's playing on, what is the pricing, what is the windowing like? You know, I'm not sure that there's more than a fraction of the population that would know what a good opening week would be during a pre-theatrical VOD window at $9.99. There's absolutely no context to it. On top of that, you have other home video windows at play. So, you know, in these reports that go out, is anybody talking about, is it available on DVD or Blu-ray? When is the Netflix window or the pay television window going to start? What is the pricing? I think that just throwing information out there without context or really explanation for what it means isn't necessarily good for anybody.
I mean, the counter to that, though, is that if the goal is acceptance of the medium and convincing more people to want to watch them and more importantly, to want to be in these films, Richard Gere got a lot of attention for how well Arbitrage did, and I think that releasing that information got into the talent community as this is something that might be good for me to do, or I'm not going to throw a fit if my film is not getting a theatrical release. I think that's kind of the other side. What do you think on the European perspective?
Yeah, us, we are totally transparent with the figures, so it's not as always, Europe has more as a kind of a cultural judgment on the way we exploit films. So the revolution in terms of VOD is not really about the figures and publishing figures and convincing people it can be efficient financially. The revolution is about explaining someone that people are watching films in many different ways today, and that a director should accept that anyway it's better that someone is watching his film on computer by paying it than by not paying it. So it's today the debate in Europe is more there. Regarding the figures, we have no problem to publish them, but it's a new business. So figures don't really mean anything today because it's when Daniela was speaking about Spain, we did a VOD, we did a day and date release in Spain with the documentary of Ken Loach, The Spirit of 45. And if I remember well, we did 2,000 sales. And it was one of the top 10 number of the year in Spain for a VOD release. So it doesn't really mean anything because it's a new business. So the figures are not, it's not mature yet. And in France, because of the political situation and the big fight of the big group against VOD, we are the first market, I think the only market of a developed country where the VOD numbers went down last year. So it's a very, it's an emerging business, which is still, we don't really know where it's going. It's still very weak. It's not there yet. When you speak about North America or even England now, I think, it's a real business. It's a big business. You can do movie thinking when you do them, you think you are going to exploit them that way. In Europe, it's not there yet. You cannot skip the usual way of processing, which is to do a TV pre-sale, to go theatrical. If we did it for Welcome to New York, it was very special. It was a unique occasion because the film had something for the French market that was very special. We had, for example, in Cannes, the biggest press coverage of every movie in Cannes, and we were not going to release the film theatrically, so it was very special. But for the rest, the numbers are not big enough to go for, I mean, it's not yet communication. It's not yet, you don't promote a film by the numbers of VOD sales. So we can be transparent because it has no effect for the moment.
Yeah, the piracy aspect is interesting too, because those numbers do get covered. You know, films that are the most pirated or films that have a high number of piracy, high impact, it does get covered. So it might be worthwhile to also show how many people are paying for films as well. For
Welcome to New York, for example, we have the figures of the first week. For one sale, the film was pirated 3 times. So we did only 25% of the business that was at the end paid and reported to the talent or the right holder. So we still have a lot of work, yes.
Interesting. I wanted to ask, excuse me, I wanted to ask a Netflix question and what Netflix's impact on this market is right now. Interesting trends with Netflix, whether Netflix will get into the day and date model as well. Your thoughts?
I mean, I think that Netflix continues to be a great supporter of independent film. I think to them that, I say this, I don't want to speak on their behalf, there seems to be an interest in just making sure the film is available on the platform as soon as possible. But in terms of day and date, I mean, I'm going by what I read in the trades here. There doesn't seem to be a real vested interest in making that happen. In so much, there's not a huge difference, I think, within that organization between going at the same time as and going, you know, a few months afterwards. That what's important to them as a pay television-like service is that there's real awareness of the film, and that will come from the theatrical release, whether it's literally at the same time as or if it's afterwards. You know, there's of course a lot of wisdom in the traditional model is you release a film, you know, on month 1 and release it on VOD in month 4, and the theatrical has generated all that awareness. And I think that Netflix probably looks at that much like a more transactionally based VOD distributor and say, well, how am I going to get the most awareness for the movies on my platform? And I think they've largely decided that spacing it out might be best for them. But again, it's probably more of a question for Netflix.
I would also add that I do think they've been great supporters of independent film, but like all businesses, they evolve over time. And I think that they have unfairly taken some criticism for not being as supportive because they're not licensing as many movies, et cetera, but they're also one of the services with some of the most immediate and best analytics as to what people watch. And like all businesses, you decide what you're going to license and what you're going to do based on what your customers' trends are saying they want to watch and they're interested in. So I think it was natural that that evolved.
IFC has a digital service, correct?
You mean its own digital service?
Yeah, it's IFC Now or whatever.
Oh, Sundance Now, absolutely.
Yeah, Sundance Now.
Yeah.
And what's the model for that, and what's the plan for that?
You know, Sundance Now, just to take 2 quick step back, we have over 700 films in a library over the last 7 years. So Sundance Now was really conceived to say, let's create a destination so that if there's ever been a film that we released in a window that's able to be viewed, there is at least one central place because movies go in and out of licensing windows with all different providers. And then that service evolved into saying there's probably curated subsets that make sense on mini subscriptions. So there's Sundance Now, and then there's something called the Doc Club, for example, inside of Sundance Now, but real specialty, where it's curated and then there's length to those documentaries. And they include Sundance Select's documentaries, but also licensed material from other distributors.
And you probably can't share the number. You probably can't share the numbers, but do they catch on?
Actually, they do, because I think not unlike a lot of things that have a niche appeal, you know, people find out there's word of mouth and they're true lovers of documentary film, et cetera, find them. You know, in a sense, it's not dissimilar to the earlier comment I made about it might not have giant cast and it may not have big pedigree, but if you put it out there and there's somebody there's a built-in fan base, people find it. And so that service was not necessarily conceived to be a huge, you know, we're going out to compete with iTunes or anybody else. It was more to say, here's a place where if you follow things that we release, you can get them regardless of the window they might be on another service you subscribe to. And then let's take a deeper dive into something that isn't as commercially available.
I think it's the curating thing is very important because I see in Europe too. I mean, there are several very independent platforms, and they make films live there, very niche films. But actually, because they do all the work around, it works on a very small scale. But it does, and it starts to be an alternative because these films don't get into a real theatrical release anymore. So this is actually, I think, a good partner for. But then in that case, it's really very independent and very small films. And a lot of documentaries actually do quite good, but it's the figures, as you just mentioned. I mean, it's still very tiny. But in the future, it can be one of the models that is an alternative, because if not, these films don't get out of the festival circuit anymore. So that's at least something where the ones that go to the festivals have another outlet after. But it's on very specific films.
Oh, and I think Lisa has to duck out quickly, but I wanted to just ask you guys, if you had to predict, will there be a time where theater owners are brought into the revenue sharing for a day-and-date release?
I mean, yes, it's in process now.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks. So explain a little bit about that and how those models will shake out.
I mean, I think that there's some interest, particularly some from the exhibitors that are really wanting to jump into the space and understand it. I mean, for example, you could take the four-walling model. I mean, if you have you know, a company like Warner Brothers four-walling literally hundreds of AMC theaters, they are participating immediately and up front, in so much that I think it's, in most cases, the distributor, they're renting out the theater and they're keeping 100% of the proceeds from whoever does go to that movie. But very rarely does the attendance actually make up for the cost of the four-wall. That it's a loss leader for the distributor, and the exhibitor, on the other hand, is benefiting in so much that they're essentially selling out the theater, and people are coming in, they're buying concessions, and so I think that AMC in particular, I think that that's working for them. I think that there there's interest from various exhibitors in taking that one step further, and maybe discounting the four-wall in exchange for a percentage of the VOD. I'm not honestly certain on the widespread adoption of that model, but I know there's interest on both sides from figuring out something like that. So I think it's going to be a slow trickle, like a lot of the stuff is, but I think that there will be an inching towards some type of even more cooperative model.
That's interesting. All right, my final question, then I'll open it up for a couple questions, is 5 years from now, what is going to be the most interesting or significant change in the distribution model from what we're seeing today?
Yeah, I will answer what I said at the beginning. For us, as we are late in the process, the major change that will be that the day-and-date release will generalize, that the law will change, and that it will become a business as it is today in the United States. But I think it's always slower because of political reason in Europe. But I think that will be the major change for us, yes.
I think that windowing will continue to evolve. You know, two recent examples. One is, I think that what Radius did on Snowpiercer is fantastic. It broke, the movie was big enough, and the release strategy and how much theatrical marketing and forewalling and pushing they did sort of broke what has been a fairly rigid system that's evolved over the last few years. You either had a pre-theatrical movie, where it was 4 to 5 weeks beforehand. It was day and date, where it was at the exact same time as the theatrical release, released the same week. Or you had a traditional window where it was, you know, you have your theatrical release, and then 90 days later you have your VOD release. What Snowpiercer did, we did something similar last year when I was at Focus with a film called We Steal Secrets. It's a smaller film, obviously it's a documentary. And I believe Magnolia did something similar with Frank this week, where they've carved out a different window, which is, okay, well, you have theatrical and then you have VOD, but there's all this space in between. Why not, you know, and Snowpiercer did a 2-week theatrical run, and then VOD came on, and they didn't just retreat on theatrical, they doubled down and continued pushing. And I think I'd like to think of that as a harbinger for more experimentation to come, that there's so many different ways you can go about it, and I think windowing in many ways, beyond just pricing, and can really benefit, because the more tool sets that distributors have at their disposal, the better it is for movies. So 5 years, I think maybe the rule book will be even more thrown out than it is today, and people will have even more flexibility.
But some people say that Snowpiercer left money on the table by doing that. Do you agree?
I think Snowpiercer is a really cool movie, but I'm not sure it's a wide release movie. I think that the instinct, in my opinion, is that if you went to 2,000 screens of that movie right away, I'm not sure that the level of expense to get there on a national theatrical basis would have been necessarily the right move. Then again, I don't have a time machine. I really don't know. But what I did like about that is that they managed to sort of do a hybrid between a real platform theatrical release and what is by definition a nationwide release. I mean, VOD is the ultimate wide release. That you're not just on 2,000 screens, you're in 110 million households.
And I wonder if there can be a major studio worldwide outrun on day and date. I don't know, maybe in 5 years we are there, like the same day and date worldwide.
There's a recent example, actually. Paramount and Magnolia did, it wasn't quite, I think, as aggressive as a true worldwide, but they did Happy Christmas, which was a pre-theatrical release in the United States. So that was at that $10 price point for about 4 weeks. And then day and date with the theatrical release, Magnolia put it out in theaters in the United States, and then Paramount distributed the film on VOD worldwide, all at the same time. And so that, like, if you went into iTunes and virtually all of their storefronts, they're promoting Happy Christmas starring Anna Kendrick, really all at once, and hopefully capitalizing upon that theatrical release in the United States.
All right, well, let's open it up if there's a question or two. How about here in the front? I think someone's going to come over with a mic.
Hello. Hi. My name is Jordan Golnadel, and this is very informative because I just directed my first feature-length film, so thank you very much, and I'm from France, so bonjour, bonjour. Now, my question is, when I talk to, I'm 25 years old, and when I talk to my friends about the movie experience or the VOD, whatever, they tell me they go to the movies for the experience, and they watch it on VOD on the computer, or stream it rather, because it's like the content is less important than the different experience, right? Now, when I tell them, did you buy it on any iTunes or something, a platform, they start laughing at me. And then when I talk to my 18-year-old brother, about watching online, he laughs even harder at me. So my question is, how do you convince people, how do you educate people into paying for something that they think is free? And coming from France, I definitely understand the culture, free culture thing. So how do you convince them to start paying for something that they can access, they know they can access for free? And also, do you think that this is the burden of the distributor, or is this a shared burden perhaps between the distributor and the VOD platforms?
Great question.
So much so, it really knocked the cover off my microphone. I think it is a problem that younger audiences, particularly on a transactional basis, and by transactional I mean paying for a single viewing or paying to own something. It's a process of education, and I do think that when you look at the numbers, I mean, it's something like iTunes and VOD. It's continuing to grow year over year, but there is some skepticism. People like to pirate. People like to wait until Netflix. I think that what the studios are doing and what the distributors are doing is very smart. I mean, if you look at, for example, the way that they've been getting consumers to really embrace electronic sell-through, specifically owning movies and really getting behind them, for about 2 years now. I don't know if you guys have noticed that, for about between 2 and 4 weeks before the film's available on VOD, you have to buy it for $14.99 or $19.99. It's the early EST window, and there's been tremendous success in that regard. Another, I think, early experiment in what they're doing is theatrical window pre-order, is that it's in theaters and people could literally have the opportunity to put money down to make sure that even if they're not going to go see it in theaters, that they will have it available as soon as it does come out, and that's starting to work. I think that what distributors are doing is that the best way to make people realize that they can pay for something is letting them realize that they should pay for something, is letting them realize that they can pay for something, making it available, doubling down in marketing. I think that's really been happening. You look at the way Google Play has been really investing into their movie service and putting up Super Bowl ads and everything like that. It's educating the public. That means marketing. That means being aggressive in windowing, and that means being smart about it.
Other thoughts? Or
it's just, I think it's also the problem of immediate access, and that's exactly what in France is not possible today, because you have to wait legally for at least 4 months to get it on VOD. So for films, it's a major problem, and it's German, I mean, in several European territories like Germany, etc. And this is actually what pushes the piracy, because the younger generation, if you don't go to the theater, at least you want to have it the same day as you read the critics or you see your friend Facebook's comments and whatever. And you just can't get it legally. So you go naturally very illegal towards the illegals. And that's a major issue of our fight towards another chronology of media, how you call it in France.
Just the big debate in France, and you must know, regarding what was called the Hadopi law, is that they want to make education that pirating a movie is stealing a good. The problem is that they don't adapt the law to that. It's nice to say, look, when you pirate a film, it's like if you steal something in a shop. But if you're caught pirating a film, you are not punished like the way you are when you steal something in a shop. So without the punishment, and the Hadopi law had a process that I think was not so tough, is that if you've been caught pirating once, you receive a warning. If it's twice, they cut you internet for 1 week, and if it's 3 times, they cut you internet. And there was a huge opposition against that. It's the thing is when it's about sanctions, stealing a movie is not punished the same way than stealing something in a shop. That's the reality today. And until you don't have that, you won't change the mentality of the young people. As long as you're just warned, you have been at school. If you just receive a warning, fine. I'll wait for next time. And that's what happened with the film. Of course, it's more general. It's true that we need to have a better access to movies for the young generation. But if you don't start with that, with knowing that you can be punished pirating, I think it will be very tough to fight against that.
I think also what's being done right now is there's not just negative reinforcement, because it is truly difficult to enforce piracy. You can punish a select few or arrest a few, or fine people, but it's just too hard to do. But to reward people for buying movies. So I think 2 big things that are happening right now is like iTunes is really pushing iTunes Extras, a DVD-like experience. If you pirate a movie, first of all, it's going to be harder for you to watch it on your big screen. It's going to look crappy. Having a beautiful, 1080p, well-compressed movie on a plasma TV at home looks great. And if you pirate it, generally you're looking at avoiding the techno lingo here, but the way the file is going to be 1/10 the size and density of what you'd get from iTunes or from Blu-ray or DVD. On top of that, iTunes Extras, you can get hours of release content. When Snowpiercer came out, it came with a lot of extra features that you're not going to get when you pirate it. And then there's ease of access. When you buy something through Ultraviolet or through iCloud, you go into any one of your devices, the movie's going to be there. So when I download Snowpiercer on my iPad, I can literally go onto my Apple TV and my TV and continue watching the movie. If you download a file, I think there's a limited number of people that really know what to do when they have like just a file on their hard drive. You can watch it on your laptop, to get it onto the TV requires a little bit of technical expertise. And I think that having a service that does that for you, like a cloud-based downloading platform, cloud-based movie store, can be tremendously helpful in just making it easier and more compelling to actually buy the movie.
One more question. How about over here?
Thanks. I'm from the Netherlands. For a while, we were, I think, even worse than France, because it was legal to download. You could, because they said, well, if you bought a computer or a tape, then part of that money is already compensation for what you download. Now they changed it, and the good news is probably that since Netflix came along, the sheer idea of the availability of the content, what you've been talking about, was so enormous that like everybody went on Netflix right away, and they were able to even up their subscription price. So that seemed like a good idea, which brings me to the question whether compiling a smart idea of all this data that's available isn't something that could be very helpful both for the filmmakers and for the business side, to knowing how many people have actually seen the movie, whether it's on TV, whether it's on Netflix, whether it's even the downloaded content. It gives you a certain market value, doesn't it? Because even if it's because there's so many other models of having commercials around YouTube or whatever, that just knowing how often your film's been seen in itself creates a certain value for the filmmaker. How do you view that?
I think that's an interesting point. Unfortunately, even the distributor has limited access to that type of information. First, the number of times it's been pirated is really hard to say. That you can sort of course estimate, and the press has done a great job of estimating how many times a film's been pirated. But you know, if it's on Netflix, for example, we're not necessarily getting the number of times it's viewed on Netflix. We're not getting the number of times it's viewed on HBO if it's on HBO. If you license the first pay television window to Showtime, Showtime's not going to say, well, you know, over the course of this many airings and this many on-demand catch-up sessions, this is how many times viewed it. That type of data just isn't available. And I think Lisa made this point earlier, is in terms of VOD and being transparent about those grosses with the filmmakers, that's already happening. That if you give your film to IFC or to to Magnolia or Bleecker Street or Focus, that you're going to get transparency of data in terms of your distribution statements. That's very standard. You know, I know IFC is great about that, and you know, we're great about that. But having the raw number of people, unfortunately, it's just not. It's not a data figure that's accessible at this point.
All right, I wanted to thank the panel. Thanks very much. This has been great.